When 2024 presidential candidate Nikki Haley last served in office as the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, her family's finances were a mess. Since then, Haley's net worth has ballooned from less than $1 million to an estimated $8 million. How did she make so much money in so little time? I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Joining me now to break it down is Forbes senior editor Dan Alexander. Dan, before we dive in and break down how GOP presidential hopeful Nikki Haley accumulated her wealth, can you remind us of the different political positions that she held over the course of her career?
Sure. So Nikki Haley basically came to prominence as the governor of South Carolina. While she was in office in her second term, Donald Trump picked her to be his ambassador to the United Nations. And then quickly into that term, she resigned, sort of a little bit out of the blue from a lot of people's perspective. And now she's back in politics again, this time as a contender for the White House in 2024.
When you think back to the entire Trump administration, it almost seemed like a revolving door. You said that resignation was a little bit out of the blue. She resigned in 2018. Can you elaborate on that? Why was it such a surprise?
Well, there were a lot of figures in the Trump administration that had a ton of controversy swirling around them the entire time that they were in office. And many of those people did flame out and ended up leaving the administration, and it was absolutely a revolving door. Nikki Haley didn't really have a lot of that controversy swirling around in her tenure, and it was still fairly early for her. If you compare it, for example, to the Biden administration, Biden's cabinet right now is almost the exact same as it was when he took office. There have been some changes, but not nearly what we saw in the Trump administration. And we're after the point at which Nikki Haley had stepped down from her role as U.S. ambassador to the UN. So it was early. There didn't seem to be a clear reason, a policy reason, disagreement with Trump reason. Nobody could really make sense of it at the time.
I do remember the day she resigned, and she seemed to be one of the only people who left on very good terms. But I do now want to talk about her net worth. So can you talk about the assets that make up the bulk of her wealth?
Yeah, so she has a large house in South Carolina on Kiowa Island. It's worth over $4 million. That has a $1.5 million mortgage against it. And then she has, a couple of small pensions from her time in South Carolina, both in the legislature there and in the governor's mansion. But she also just has a ton of cash. So investments in, wide-ranging holdings. And this is the result of her giving a lot of speeches and writing books after she left the Trump administration and before she declared her intent to run for president against her former boss, Donald Trump.
So her net worth really exploded from less than $1 million to now $8 million. Is that normal for a political figure to amass that amount of wealth so quickly?
The way that she made her money is very typical. Books, speeches, consulting, serving on boards. The amount of money that she made in that portion of time, particularly for someone coming from her position, is really kind of extraordinary. For example, if you just compare her to Mike Pence, who obviously a more prominent name, a higher ranking position in the Trump administration, somebody of huge historical importance. So any book that he would write, would go for a lot of money. Mike Pence is worth $4 million. That's half as much as Nikki Haley, and both of them started relatively close to zero. So they started at about the same point, and Nikki Haley is now worth twice as much. Now, because she left the Trump administration early, that did give her some more time to give speeches and, to make money outside of office. But nonetheless, for somebody in her position to go out and make that much money, it's a lot.
Something that's really interesting is that records show that she financially helped her parents over the years. So first, can you tell us a little bit about them? What do we know about Nikki Haley's parents?
Yeah, so Nikki Haley's parents are immigrants from India, and they came here and settled in a small town in South Carolina, raised their family there, including Nikki Haley. Her dad was a professor, and her mom was an entrepreneur. She started a clothing business, and when Nikki Haley was just a kid, she put her to work in it. She lost her bookkeeper at the time and said, "Hey, Nikki, why don't you fill in?" And so sure enough, she did. And then went on to study accounting at Clemson and come back and be the CFO of her mom's company. before she ran for office. Her parents, were pretty successful. They, bought valuable properties, and this business that her mom was running seemed to be going pretty well. But at a certain point, it looks like they got tight on cash. Maybe they just bought a little bit too much, spent a little bit more than they should have. And in 2014, Nikki Haley had just written a book. This is when she was governor, and she loaned, along with her husband, about $400,000 to her parents. Now, that was an enormous amount of money for Nikki Haley at the time. She didn't have much other than that and her house. When she was in office as Trump's ambassador, her two largest assets appear to have been the loan that she made to her parents and her personal home. And there really wasn't a whole lot beyond that. While she was in office, shortly after she became ambassador to the UN, her parents stopped paying back the mortgage that they owed to Bank of America on one of their properties. And Nikki Haley held a secondary mortgage on that same property. So all of a sudden, it looked like her parents were running short on cash. And because Nikki Haley's own finances were so tied up with theirs, like she wasn't going to have the money that she expected to have either, because that loan that she had made to them all of a sudden was in a lot of danger.
$400,000, loaning that out to anyone. I mean, that's a huge amount of money. Is there any indication that her parents paid her back?
So they ultimately struck a deal where they essentially gave, for the deed says $5 in love and affection, a strip mall that the clothing business had been located in, to Nikki Haley's husband. However, when they gave them that strip mall, they also gave them about $1.1 million of debt attached to that strip mall. So it wasn't nearly as nice of a gift as you might expect. Nikki Haley's husband was able to sell that off and might have made back a little money, but it doesn't appear that he was able to make back the full $400,000 that Nikki's parents owed them. And ultimately, it looks like they just forgave that debt, but we can't be entirely sure.
And according to recent national polls and a recent Economist YouGov poll, Nikki Haley's polling in the middle of the pack of the GOP field. Right now, she's at 3%. But how does her net worth stack up against the other GOP contenders?
Also sort of middle of the pack. Obviously, she's in a different universe from Donald Trump and Vivek Ramaswamy, both extremely successful business tycoons. But she is pretty rich compared to the others. She's not quite as rich as RFK Jr., who inherited a lot of family money, but she's richer than Mike Pence. She's richer than Asa Hutchinson. She's richer than Tim Scott. A lot of the people who are sort of in the, I guess, middle of the pack might be a generous term if you're polling at that percentage, but, with Trump being so dominant, it sort of is the middle of the pack. She's richer than most of the other people in that band.
I know 3% sounds like you should be coming in almost dead last, but there are a few people polling at 0. So 3% is better than 0, but you've been following money and politics for a while now. Is there an indication that running for president can help your net worth or hurt it?
It definitely can help. It also can hurt, I will say. Basically, if you don't have a lot of money, running for president generally is going to be good for your finances. The reason that people were willing to pay Nikki Haley is the same reason that people were willing to pay Hillary Clinton to give speeches, because they thought they might be watching a speech of the future president of the United States. Now, of course, in both cases, those people had interesting things to say, vast foreign policy experience, and they wanted to hear that too. But you don't necessarily pay somebody $200,000 just to hear a foreign policy perspective. You can get a subscription to The Economist or whatever. For a lot cheaper than that. What you want is star power in the room. And so that's why these people get paid a lot of money to give speeches. So even the idea that somebody's going to run for president can be really, really lucrative. Now, the exception here is that if you already have a business, for example, if you take Donald Trump, running for politics might not be good for your finances because it's going to polarize a lot of your customers. So if you're already rich, it's probably going to hurt you. If you're not rich, it's probably going to help you.
Dan Alexander, thanks for your reporting.
Thank you.